Let's now do the opposite of the last lecture and create a function that returns a new function. So I'm going to write a very simple greet function here, because this is really just to demonstrate this point here as easily as possible. So here we can pass in a greeting like hi or hello or something like that. And then all this function will do is to return a new function. So as always, we write return and then simply a new function value. And this new function that we return will also have a parameter. So it will be able to receive arguments, right? And so what this function here will do is it will simply log to the console basically the greeting and then the name of the person that we passed into this function. So let's just write this and it will make sense when we see this in action. I'm sure it looks a bit weird right now. And now let's actually use the greet function. So let's say greet with hey. And so hey is the greeting here. Now, what will be the result of this function call? Well, it's going to be this function, right? And so let's store the result of this function call, which will be, as we just said, that function. I'm going to call this one greeter hey. So this value here now is actually now a function, okay? And essentially it is this function. So what this means is that we can now call this greeter function just as if it was any other function that we defined ourselves. So let's say greeter hey, Jonas, and let's call it another time greeter hey, Stephen. And now I'm going to run it, and indeed we get hey Jonas and hey Stephen. And so this worked again because this greeter hey is essentially this. And so now we're calling it with the argument of Jonas. And so this name here is then, of course, this name that we specified here. Now the greeting is still coming from this greet function here. And in case you're wondering why that actually works, it is because of something called a closure. Now closures are a very complex and difficult to understand mechanism that's part of JavaScript. And so there are two separate videos at the end of this section about closures. So closures is one of the most misunderstood topics in JavaScript. So don't worry about that now. What matters here is that our first function, greet, returned a new function that we stored into this variable. And so this variable is now just a function that we can call, as we did here, again using the parenthesis syntax. And of course, we could also do it all in one go. So we can again call greet. Let's say hello now. And so again, this here is now a function. Okay, so if this is a function, we can immediately call it, right? And so we call like this, and then we pass in the name, which is the argument of this function here, right? And so even though this looks a bit weird, it is going to work. And so we get hello Jonas now. All right. And now this example might look a bit weird and unnecessary for you. Like, what's the point of having functions returning other functions? Well, this will actually become extremely useful in some situations. And especially if we're using a really important programming paradigm called functional programming. And I think I've mentioned it sometimes throughout the course. And we're actually going to look at functional programming by the end of the course. Maybe not by the time I first publish the course, but certainly some point later. Anyway, make sure to understand this here, and especially this line of code. And if you understand this, then I'm sure you understood everything what happened here. Now, just as a small challenge to finish here, try to rewrite this function here using only arrow functions. And believe me, that's going to look a little bit confusing, but I'm sure you can do it. So just take some time and try to rewrite that greet function using arrow functions, and I see you here in a minute. Okay, so let's see how it's done. So greet, just gonna call it R. So this one takes, again, greeting as an argument, and it returns a new function. So this means that it only has one line of code which returns something. So all we need is this arrow, and then we don't even need the curly braces, and we don't need the return statement. So what are we going to return from here? A new function. So again, an arrow function, and so another arrow here. And then simply this. Let's give it a save and a try. So greet R, and let's use hi this time. And yeah, we get hi Jonas. Okay, so this is an even shorter way of writing the same function, but in my opinion, it's actually a lot more confusing. And that's why I wrote it using this more traditional way here. But in the end, it's also simply one arrow function returning another arrow function. And so that's the essence of this video, which I hope was clear to you. And if so, then let's move on right to the next one.